Clarification, Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, my cut to the MOT this year was a follow-up to my colleague, Mr. Faisal Manap's adjournment motion of October 2021 on motorcycle ownership and his other PQs on high motorcycle COEs. I note Minister's point about finance as a service offered by many motorcycle dealerships, and I recognize the role that it plays. However, the prospect of speculative bidding of motorcycle COEs has always been a concern of the public, but I will not go through the newspaper articles that can substantiate this concern. Minister said that the violations of motorcycle financing would be subject to the Hire Purchase Act, but the Hire Purchase Act comes under the purview of MTI. In view of high motorcycle COE prices, does the Ministry of Transport, for example, monitor the number of repossessed motorcycles, and would it consider doing so to have a better fix on the impact of motorcycle financing through dealerships today? To this end, would the Ministry consider a broader study into alternative financing options for our motorcycle riders, such as through cooperatives, that could bargain for not just better block financing rates from financial institutions, but also reduce the arbitrage component of some loans that are in turn offered by some motorcycle finance companies today? My second clarification is very short. It was pertaining to the second point of my cut. Does the Minister have a perspective on the total number of motorcycle COEs transferred to the open category over the last 10 years? I use 10 years because it is the lifespan of a COE, even though I note that the practice had been stopped in 2017. Would the Ministry consider an increase in motorcycle COEs to make up for the COEs transferred to the open category in the past? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his questions. Actually, his two questions straddle the gamut of almost all the issues, so they're deceptive in their apparent simplicity, but let me endeavor to respond. Perhaps I start with the second point on COEs and allocation. I think what the Leader of the Opposition is driving at is whether there's a way to reallocate some of the old COEs. I think that was a point he made earlier because of the old system, which was discontinued in 2017. And I think it's important that first, let me say that, and I want to reiterate this point, I omitted to mention Mr. Faisal Manap's adjournment motion, but as I said, I don't think any one party here has a monopoly on the care and concern for motorcycle owners. We all do. We are all endeavoring to help, and the question is how to best achieve that. Secondly, let me make the point that we need to be clear about what is the overall intent and structure of the system. So I start with the vehicle growth rate. We have taken an important, albeit difficult decision, that the vehicle growth rate will be zero. And we've done this because of the overall interest in terms of the livability of our city and ensuring that even our roads, the flows, the vehicular flows can be sustained going forward, taking into account road development and all the other modes of transportation that we are developing. So that is the first and important consideration, baseline point, that vehicle growth rate is zero. Why is that important? It's important because the moment we agree on that, and I'm assuming the Leader of the Opposition agrees with that as a principle, because if you do, then any mechanism to reallocate COEs is basically a zero-sum exercise. We have to take it from some other category in order to give it to a particular category. Now, the Leader of the Opposition's proposal is to take it, I think, from, was it Cat E or Cat, I can't remember where, but there have been similar arguments made for other categories, whether it is for Cat A, whether it's for Cat C, commercial, in this House. So how do we decide then where to take it from, where to allocate it, how much to allocate, and how do you measure that the outcome has been successful? Because clearly the intent here is that I'm reading into the member's comment that, unless prices soften, that the desired objective has not been served. But we have to look at any change we make to the COE system holistically, for all the reasons I've just highlighted. So to propose one particular dimension for modification without looking at the systemic implications, I think would be remiss on our part. But as I've said, having said that, we have been prepared to take measures. We have, not just in terms of the systemic measures to help motorcycle owners, but in terms of costs, but also some of the more recent measures to curb any potential speculative behavior on the part of motorcycle dealers. And we remain ready to do more. And as I've pointed out, the most recent couple of months has been quite telling, because there have been 450 TCOEs that have been forfeited, which means at certain points there is a pushback in the market, and now the dealers have to let them go. And this re-enters the supply. And as I said, I hope buyers and dealers will take note of this when making their decisions on bidding and buying for Cat D. The second point, I think, or the first point that he raised was on the financing elements. And whether, so first, I think we should all be very focused on our core mission. And the mission in LTA and for the Ministry of Transport is to make sure that we've agreed on a policy for managing the population of vehicles, and we have an allocation mechanism through the COE, and we should ensure that that is working to the best of our ability. Having said that, financing is essential because all buyers of vehicles generally, or most buyers of vehicles, do need financing assistance. Whether we can study further whether there are any other alternatives, I would say that this is actually better left to the market and to industry players to respond. It can, because in the end, LTA or the government is not in a unique position in any way, or even in a position where we have special insights into this. The practices, the member himself has highlighted, whether it's a cooperative, etc. So the mechanisms exist in other contexts, perhaps. And it's really, I think, best left to the market. What we will do, however, is even though the Hire Purchase Act is under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, if, there are issues about practices that contravene the regulations, these are areas that we will want to make sure they are investigated thoroughly, because they do affect the effective functioning of the COE market.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Minister, for the considered reply. On the point of where do you take how do you reallocate now, I recognize the difficulty in doing so, particularly in the context of a zero growth policy, a zero vehicle growth policy, I beg your pardon. But I think the other context to consider, and I make this appeal to the Minister, is the landscape with regard to what has happened since 2017 and today, insofar as burgeoning of the gig economy and the need for lower-income Singaporeans to have affordable mode of transportation to deliver food, whatever else. So that was the context in which I raised the argument that covered a previous policy of LTA, which was to take COEs from the motorcycle category D and put it to the open category. And I was wondering whether there could be some considerations because of the landscape to see whether it's feasible to consider a transfer back. And I think in my cut I used the word equity and fairness. That is not meant to dilute the Minister's response of the larger task of reallocation from other categories as well. I take that point. On the point of The market, indeed, I think ultimately that is the bedrock that has to sustain financing. But in view of the Forward Singapore exercise, I think there was an exercise which looked at cooperatives partnering businesses to better manage finance. And I'm wondering whether the ministry could nudge our cooperatives to consider providing loans for low-income Singaporeans so as to ensure that the arbitrage that motorcycle financiers provide is not overly large to the detriment of lower-income Singaporeans who need these bikes in the first place.
So, Speaker, on the point on reallocation, so I think some data points are useful. Over the last 10 years, the population of motorcycles in Singapore has been around 138 to 140,000. So it's been at about that level. It hasn't been so volatile. And when we talk about allocation to Cat E, it's not just from Cat D. And we continue to have allocation from Cat A, Cat B, and Cat C into Cat E, which then gets recycled. So if we talk about changed circumstances that warrant consideration specifically for motorcycles because of, say, delivery, the same might apply to Cat A cars, for example, because they are used for Grab or those kinds of, platform services. So what I'm trying to illustrate is I don't think we have a disagreement in terms of wanting to help. But we have to be very clear that in our desire to do so, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because it's a system that in general has worked. But there are, and let's also be clear, why we are discussing this today is because the prices have gone up. When the prices were lower, we were not debating these issues in the same way. So we have to understand clearly what is the driver, what is causing it, be prepared to respond if in fact there are structural issues or systemic issues that we think need to be resolved. But I'm just advocating having a care and also trying to present the larger perspective. The second point on, because the point has been made, by the way, on equity and fairness, and I think equity and fairness depends on where you stand and whom you're advocating for. And I can assure the leader that I have had many who have advocated for other groups with equally meritorious claims for favorable allocation. So I think it is a subjective discussion, one that we need to take into account, we need to take serious consideration of in terms of the circumstances. But we should also make sure that if we are going to make a systemic change, it is one that we can then not just defend, but also make sure that we can sustain it in the long run because it is warranted in the manner that we've just discussed. On the possibility, so now it's beyond MTI, it's gone to the cooperatives and whether we can ask them to. I will dutifully convey the message, but in the end, I just want to come back to what I said at the start, which is that in the end, there are various market mechanisms. And we should encourage it. I fully agree with that. And if there is, and as the leader said, if there's an arbitrage possibility, and if the market is functioning well, then somebody will take advantage of the arbitrage and come in, whether it's a cooperative or another finance business or whatever. So I just want to make that point.
Ms. Seng Ling Ling.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have two clarifications for SMS Amy. I really welcome the Friendly Street pilot. I think it's a great project. And my question is that instead of it being just a standalone project with a committee, for constituency that is entering into a major NRP, the Neighbourhood Renewal Program, can it also be extended as part of it so that we can have a more collective and integrated plan for our residents? The second clarification is for the installing of lifts in pedestrian overhead bridges, the POBs. I'm really glad to hear that it will be expanded in recognition of our aging population. I have a block facing a POB that is on one side a very densely populated residential area, but opposite is an industrial area. And in the consultation of LTA, I've been informed that because the density is not high enough to justify this still being considered. I'd just like to ask if there's a hope for it so that my residents can hope for one day having the lift there as well because they are also aging. Thank you.
Streets, we are wanting to work with the local community and we will form a committee. That committee would comprise all stakeholders. So if you have a neighborhood renewal program there, then the relevant stakeholders can also be involved. Indeed, actually, the Friendly Streets initiative really is about integrating, looking at an entire zone and then putting in place the various projects that we may have, whether it's a school zone, silver zone, your NRP, as well as other initiatives to make the area more friendly for users. So definitely. Regarding the POBs, it is a coveted, scarce commodity. And we will always have to prioritize. But having said that, definitely you can continue to hope for it and we'll take note of this.
Ms. Polisan.
Thank you, Chairman. I have three questions, three clarifications. First one for Minister Iswaran. Minister Iswaran mentioned the mandatory switch to EVs by 2025 for the airside vehicles. And these airside vehicles are mainly owned by private companies or listed companies, the ground handlers. So this will add new cost pressures with new vehicles and electricity for these companies. And may I know if there are any plans for MOT to look at some incentives to ease the transition for these companies to deal with these cost pressures? The second question is for SMS, Amy. This is regarding the EV chargers. So we have about 500,000 private vehicles in Singapore, and there are plans to increase to about 60,000 EVs island-wide by 2030. I have a question in my cut regarding whether there are plans to convert the existing petrol kiosks, petrol stations, to support EV charging. There are currently 180 of this. So hopefully we may also use some of these assets to convert them into fast charging EV stations in the future to augment to these 60,000 EVs required nationwide. Third clarification is for SPS Baey. SPS Baey shared the trial of the cycling zones in Seletar West Camp. Thank you for this trial. I'm sure the cyclists will appreciate. I'd just like to know if following the successful 5-month trial, will there be plans to extend to more areas, especially the longer stretches like in Lim Chu Kang area? Thank you.
As you have said, 60,000 by 2030, our estimate is that should be able to serve at least half the car population. The kiosks, about 180 all around, about half are actually on TOLs or short leases. So depending on how the demand for EV chargers panned out, basically now there are already petrol kiosks that have installed EV charger there. So I think for some, it is a question of business model and how they transit. And then for others, depending on whether there's demand in that specific location and so on, some may actually transit out. So we'll have to look at this as the EV charging network builds up and demand for EV cars increase.
I thank Ms. Polisan for the interest in the road cycling lane. So this is a time-based cycling lane. it's actually a road lane for normal vehicles at other times. Because as we have limited land space, road space, we can't always build dedicated paths, right? So therefore, we came up with this first time ever time-based lane in West Camp Road. So only that 6 hours a week is open to cyclists and buses only. So far, it's been 5 months since we started it. As I said, the feedback, the observations have been positive. So we are going to do a sort of proper survey among the users, also to get feedback on how the scheme could be improved. So if all things go well, I hope that the cycling lane at Seletar will become a permanent one, and that will give us confidence to explore other areas. So these will be areas where road cyclists are already using, because we want to go where they want. And by the same time, at a time, a day where normal road traffic is already low, so that it doesn't have a high potential for clashes to happen. So Lim Chu Kang area, yes, we will look at that, and we hope that we will do more in other areas as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Poole has raised an important point regarding the cost impact. This is why we, in coming up with this recommendation on electrification and from 2025, it is really about focusing on the replacement vehicles. So as the existing fleet reaches its end of life, the replacement has to be the electric, and eventually perhaps some other variants may emerge. Then the question of cost, relative costs, well, I would say that there are a few things happening here at the same time. Even today, based on our discussions with the operators, like the larger players, the life cycle cost evens out, and you make the switch. So that's the first point. Secondly, I think we have to bear in mind that costs of electric vehicles and solutions, as the scale grows, it's a reasonable proposition that the cost may become even more competitive. And we've already seen that over the last several years as the EV manufacturing and supply has scaled up. And on the other side of it, any costs associated with emissions also have to be factored in. So, for example, in Singapore, we've already said about our carbon tax trajectory. So when you factor all of this into account, I think in general it's a manageable transition without imposing undue costs. And I think the businesses also see the competitive value proposition of doing so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask about 2.5 questions. My first question is in regards to the friendly streets, which I actually laud, and I'm happy to hear that friendly streets will be launched including to Toa Payoh as well. My first question is in regards to that friendly street. Will it, when you co-create, does it involve the option of having covered linkways? The reason why I ask is because some areas are beyond MRT stations, and whether the covered linkways would be part of the slew or a suite of options that can be chosen by the committee. Second question is in regards to my question in my card on sustainability on Ministry's plans to roll out affordable EV motorcycles as part of the sustainability efforts in our land transport system. So I'd like to ask Minister whether these affordable EV motorcycles, as we move, hopefully we'll move away from ICE motorcycles to EV motorcycles over the next decade or so, but it has an impact on the demand that Member Tam has mentioned just now. And what does it mean for Singapore, and whether they can have an assessment of the possible early adoption incentives for EV motorcycles and Singaporeans who want to get EV motorcycles, whether there'll be incentives. My half question is in regards to electric buses. Minister mentioned 400 new electric buses, electrification. I've met residents that mentioned that they really want to have electric buses because it's quieter, it's less noisy, especially for those staying near to the second, third floor of HDB blocks facing bus stops. Can it be speeded up, Minister, even faster before half of buses by 2030, possibly all by 2030, Minister? If it's
Sounds
possible.
like a full question. Your half question was requesting it for it to be in Toa Payoh. So it's 3.5 questions, but never mind.
Yeah, it's okay. I can answer that half question, right? The linkway. So that's why we are forming a committee and getting local stakeholders and involved. We will take all suggestions and ideas into consideration and study this as part of the Friendly Street initiative. And obviously, we'll have to look at the viability and so on.
I'm tempted to say every street is a friendly street, in the end. But anyway. So on affordable EV, electric motorbikes, we are running various trials, as Mr. Saktiandi would be aware. There are different sort of models. You have the plug-in charger types, but they are largely the more high-end type of motorcycles. There are the battery swapping kind of models, which seem to be becoming more common in other markets. Our concerns would, in particular, center on fire safety type issues, because if there are batteries that can be removed, then what is the charging arrangement, etc., and so on. So this is the reason why we are conducting these pilots. And I think learning from them, then we'll be able to come up with the appropriate regulations on that. And I think in terms of affordability, so my expectation is there will probably end up, like in cars, be a spectrum of such electric motorbike solutions available in the market. And in fact, you can already see it in other parts of the world. On buses and electric buses, can we speed it up? This is already quite a bit of an acceleration over the last 1-2 years, because we decided we have to move. What I think I would say is, let us get this first tender out. Let us run in the system a bit more, because what we've had is up to now is pilots and trials. We now need to do this at scale, understand the implications, because when you ramp up and it goes up to half or more of your fleet, the implications are quite different to running a small-scale pilot. So let us do that, and I just want to assure the member that we share his enthusiasm for this transition.
So Dennis Tan, we keep it tight.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 clarifications for SMS Amy and 1 quick clarification for SPSB.
We need to finish by 1.
Yes, I will endeavor to do that.
But we need the time for the
We'll do that.
response as well.
Yes. First, I would like to ask very quickly, does the government have any plans for alternate renewable energy choices for EV drivers besides natural gas? And related to this, has the government studied the feasibility of having some of the public chargers be powered by solar panels fitted on the MSCP, at least in part? My second clarification is the government concerned with the slower conversion of heavier vehicles and lorries to EVs, and will it affect our plans for 2030 and beyond? And the third clarification for SMS Amy, will the government actively engage logistics company directly on their plans to convert to EVs to speed up the process? And my clarification for SPS Baey, thank you for the reply on PMDs. And I just want to request that the government continue its enforcement and engagement and public education efforts in respect of PABs as well, because it's common to see e-bikes beating red lights, cycling against traffic, not wearing helmets. And I also see many cruising on e-bikes without having a pedal at all, which is not consistent with LTA requirement that the motor power can only cut in when the cyclist starts to pedal. So it suggests that there's still a lot of illegal PABs running around. Thank you.
Short responses, please.
So for using cleaner renewable energy for electricity generation, that's actually under MTI. Yeah, MSCV solar panels. There is actually already a scheme. HDB also has a scheme, the Solar Nova scheme, to put solar panels on rooftops. Yeah, and if MSCP is possible, I'm sure. Actually, that's also not under us. Yeah. Logistics company, cleaner transition to cleaner vehicles. We are working with them, but I think it's now limited by availability of this kind of vehicles in terms of technology.
Yes, I understand from that. I agree with Mr. Tan that indeed when we sort of restricted usage of PMDs, a lot use PABs. And but looking at the data we have, the offences that we have caught people using non-compliant PABs, they have come down over the since 2020. So last year we had about 600 offences summons given to non-compliant PABs. So that will include those which you observe not paddling, but they are able to move. So probably they have some illegal modification as well. So these are caught, and this will be confiscated. As for the enforcement on the roads, speeding red lights, all this, we hold joint enforcement with traffic police, and also in areas like on PCNs, we hold joint operations with MParks officers as well. So we'll continue to do enforcement and want all users to understand rules and abide by the rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the specific point that Mr. Dennis Tan raised, I think the practical way forward is for our chargers to tap off the grid rather than have dedicated solar panels or other sources of energy coming in. And the reason is because if you say take solar panels, for example, the intermittency means that you may not have, if there's a cloud cover, you have a problem. And how does the charging rate work? Then you need batteries to store the electricity in order to do this. So the more efficient way of doing this is to have the diversification and the incorporation of renewable energies at the grid level, which is what the Energy Market Authority is doing by calling for proposals for renewable energy supply into Singapore. And so through that, we will achieve greater renewable energy component in the electricity that is used to charge EVs as well.
Saktiandi Supan, would you like to withdraw your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the team from MOT for answering all our questions, especially the 46 cuts from members that took a very efficient time frame, almost 1 hour from 6:55 to 8 sharp. And the responses taken by MOT Minister Iswaran, SMS Amy Khor, and SMSG and SPS BM Keng, which took just 1.5 hours, which in line with what SMSG mentioned, we being efficient at the checkpoints, and I think MOT has shown it being efficient. At the same time, as well as SMSG mentioned, I was surprised to hear that there are 300,000 trees being saved, equivalent to 300 trees being saved just by changes in the maritime sector as well. So I would like to thank the MOT team at the back end as well for their continuing work to ensure a resilient, sustainable and inclusive transport system, and all the members that have spoken within that 1 hour last night. I hope we can actually continue to make sure that we continue to maintain that sustainability efforts going forward as well. Mr. Chairman, with that, I beg to leave to withdraw my amendment. Thank you.
So, Honourable Member, given leave to withdraw the amendment. I think leave of the majority is given, the amendment is withdrawn. The question is that the sum of $2,550,842,700 for HW stand part of the main estimates. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the sum of $10,165,701,000 for HW stand part of the development estimates. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.